welcome to the dear participants. Nice. We have some people who are joining us via YouTube. We have some people who are joining us directly in the Zoom, and some who are streaming this um, or who are asking their questions in Mentimeter. And it's very nice to have all of you here as part of the deep dive on urban resilience, data privacy, and neoliberalism with Richard Sennett himself. My name is Yolanda Rother. I will be taking you through the deep dive today. And we're very happy that Richard has time for a live Q&A to answer your questions. And we have a digital applause and a warm welcome to you, Richard. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
First of all, just a brief note on the process to all the participants. If you have a question, you can raise your virtual hand. I will then call you by name and you can ask your question. As soon as you have set this, we turn off your audio and the next one comes. If you don't want to speak, you can also just ask the question in writing via the chat and we'll pick it up from there. For all of our YouTube participants, please do go to menti.com and then fill in the code 231396 to enter your question for Richard. Please also do understand that it's not everyone's turn. If you have raised your hand, you will not be able, sometimes you will not be able to get it because others may have already raised their hand before you. So now let's get into the deep dive. I think I've already seen a few questions come in through Mentimeter. Yes, there's a few here. So the first question that I have is, what do you think about the use of high tech in nursing homes with the implementation of robots?
I don't quite know what the question is aimed at. Do you mean that robots would replace nurses?
That would be good to know specifically what they mean, but in this case, I would think it's, I think it will be using the AI in nursing homes as well as robots replacing nurses. Yeah.
I don't think it's very likely. And if you were 90 years old and had dementia and had very difficult needs, the notion that there was a robot there caring for you would not, I don't think, be very reassuring. You know, the one thing I'd say about this question is there's, I teach at MIT, so I'm in the tech world. One of the things I've learned from people at MIT is when not to use AI. And that's an important thing to do. You know, naively, we think it can do everything we can do. It's very few tech people really actually believe that. And I think taking care of, you know, people who have COVID-19 or who are, you know, deep in dementia is not on. It wouldn't be on for my colleagues.
Okay, so I guess the answer could also be a little bit more varied, where in some cases it could make sense, but in other cases it definitely does not make any sense.
That sounds very, very, very.
I'm glad that we agree on that one. I have another question. This one's more on the urban sphere. In your view, is more access to data in cities, for instance, through open data, a way to become more inclusive? Or is it rather a way to expropriate data from citizens? And how would you balance this?
It depends which data it is.
Okay.
If you want to do what, say, the Brazilians do, which is share the economic resources of communities in order to do collective budgeting for the community, that's great. If it's surveillance data, I'm against it. So again, it's a question of what data you're using and what are you using it for. A lot of smart cities are totally oppressive, but that's not the fault of the data. That's the fault of the way it's set up. So it's controlled by central government. You have no command over the data you're furnishing. But it doesn't have to be that way. That's not the fault of the tech. That's the fault of politics.
which is interesting. We had that in our discussion earlier today, where we were talking about the power dynamics and how technology is being used and data is being used. So it goes back to that same discussion.
Right, exactly.
So there's another question here. It says, in your session, you referred to tourists or mass tourists occupying cities. And how does this affect the culture in a city?
Well, it creates a kind of, in the cities I know best, which are London and New York, it creates a kind of no-go zone in public space for ordinary citizens. Very few New Yorkers can be found in the center of the city in Times Square. Nobody hangs out there. And the same thing is true in the center of London. And basically what we've had is a kind of, I'm talking about mass tourism, not the nice visitor who's wandering around the streets, but huge buses full of people who are doing Times Square or doing Trafalgar Square. They're there for the selfie, and the citizen is just, crowded out of those zones. It matters. I mean, tourism, big part of the economy of cities, but it matters because, if you're a tourist, you want to see how actually people live in another place, rather than just see people like yourself who are looking for the nearest McDonald's and so on. So I think we really have to rethink about what is a tourist zone, what people want when they go on vacation to a city, and how the city is not just their red meat, as it were. They should be participants in the city rather than voyeurs.
Very
It's
interesting.
a big lesson that the Venetians are learning now.
Absolutely. Yes.
So that's kind of issue, I think.
Yeah, and it could also, this whole time now could be a reclaiming in a way of one's own city. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a question that came in through the chat from Caroline. And she says, thank you, Richard, for this interesting impulse, especially your disapproval of the notion of surveillance and the role of power. What is your thought on the role of the state in the design of technology? Isn't there a broad way to influence the digital infrastructure?
There is. And one of the things that can be done about it very practically is that most tech firms get away with murder. That is, they use the resources of the state, they don't pay taxes. And they're monopolies that are transcendent to being controlled by the state. In Europe, we're trying to solve that now, at least by making these tech giants pay their fair share of taxes. But in my view, the issue about this is that you shouldn't be able to make money out of a lot of forms of tech. A service like Twitter should be nonprofit,
Interesting.
Just the way we don't want, unfortunately, we've sold off things like rights to water and, garbage and things like that to the private sector. We've also sold off information rights, and we should renationalize, take those back. It's a public good and it should be owned by the public, in my view.
Very interesting take on that. And yeah, I'm thinking about that. Twitter as a nonprofit would be fantastic, actually. There's another question that reached us via Mentimeter, and this is, what can be done to form better collaborations for a sustainable agenda on the global level?
I don't know how to answer that so broadly, but I can tell you what needs to be done in cities, because this is what my work is for the United Nations, which is that we have to engage citizens much more in the process of dealing with climate issues. It's too top-down. And by that, I mean that what's left for citizens is sort of things like, well, you should cycle less, or cycle more, things like that. But if there are no cycle lanes, that's that's not very possible. If you say, well, consume less energy, again, the way to do that at a local level is to control the energy that's being generated or used in your city. And it's a terrible, it's really a terrible problem, because a citizen doesn't have much power to actually control the conditions of energy use that they have. There are allotted tasks that they can perform. And again, I think it's a matter of taking back to the public, which is really what belongs to the public, which is control over, this physical aspect of people's lives, and we don't have it.
Super interesting. We have a few more questions and not so much time. So I'm going to take one more question from Menti, which is, if you were in charge as president, what would you change as soon as possible?
Oh, I put Donald Trump in jail.
Fantastic. I love that answer. And the whole office here is laughing because of it. Great one. And then we have a question from the chat from Salim Harbi. It is, thank you for the great and sharp information. Do you not think that the people of the South, and due to the several historical events such as colonialization, war, mainly oppressive, have developed a natural sense of resilience, and they will better face the impact of COVID-19 on many levels?
I really appreciate the impulse behind your question, which is that when you're driven by necessity, you're sometimes more inventive than people who are not, who are on the other end of power. But the thing about COVID-19 is that there are basic things that people need. They need protective gear. When there's a vaccine, they need to have first access to it because they're going to be the most vulnerable, and so on. And it can't just be a matter of protective behavior. You need actually access to resources. And so a lot of the survival and coping mechanisms that people have are great. But that alone enough is not to protect people. And it's the same problem as with climate change. You can be very saving in the community, but if you don't have access to resources, you're still at the short end of the stick. You'll have to ask me a final question.
Yes, we only have 2 minutes left. And the final question comes from Menti, and it's, how can we break the suppression of automized workflows and self-exploitation and organize workers in order to change capitalism?
Oh, a nice, simple question.
Nice.
That's a good one. Let's see. I have to forego my grandchildren entirely to answer that. All I can say about this is, that I have been throughout my life interested in ways that we can dismantle global monopolies. And I think we've arrived at a situation I'm the world's oldest and last surviving true socialist. And we've arrived at a situation now which is so great in terms of the way information is dealt with, in terms of the way we try and deal with the environment, even in terms of the way we deal with the pandemic, that monopoly capitalism is going to fail us. And the moment is, I think, really arrived to really take rigorous action to break down these unresponsible, irresponsible agents of domination. And I felt that when I began writing 50 years ago, and I feel it even stronger today, even in the kind of new economy that we have. So let me thank you for inviting me on to Res Publica, and I hope you are well.
Thank you so much. This was so great. Thank you for taking the time to answer all these questions in so much detail. And we will let you off so you can get to wherever you need to go next on
Okay,
time. Have a
bye-bye.
good one. Goodbye.